and happy Friday. It is the end of July, so you know what that means. That means a new episode of Mavens of Manufacturing. And I just want to say thank you to our sponsor for this episode. This episode is brought to you by Omega Cool NanoCut 300, the next gen metalworking fluid, giving shops longer tool life, less maintenance, and zero burn or I need more coffee. Odor. It's bio-based, safer, and it beats the big names on cost and performance. And you can catch them at IMTS. I'm super excited to meet them because they actually sponsored Turtle Tech, which is the team that I mentor here in Beloit. And Turtle Tech is actually going to show up at IMTS on Wednesday. So super excited about that. And today's episode, manufacturing spends a lot of time talking about equipment and systems, technology, efficiency, and output. Every one of those conversations eventually comes back to the people because that's what makes the wheel spin. People decide whether to raise the concern, question the process, share the idea, support the change, or quietly work around a problem nobody wants to address. Culture influences every one of those decisions, yet too many companies still treat it like a statement mounted near the front entrance instead of something leaders create through their behavior. And I know you guys have seen those values painted on the wall somewhere at some facility in your lifetime. Kathy Miller, who is my guest today, has spent her career inside that tension. She started on the factory floor at 17, later led global manufacturing operations, and now helps industrial leaders build cultures where people can do their best work and measurable results follow. We also can't forget about the 2 books that she wrote, which we will be touching on one of those today during this episode. The first one was Steel Toes and Stilettos, a true story of women manufacturing leaders and lean transformation. She co-authored that with Shannon Carrells, and they both were on Mavens back in episode 55. So make sure to take a look back in those archives. And then today we're going to be talking about More is Better, leading operations with meaning, optimism, and relationships for excellence. Kathy, hello. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Megan. So excited to be here with you.
I am so excited to have you back. I've gotten to know you over the years since you've been on Mavens of Manufacturing, and I have to tell you, you are one of the best human beings I know. You're always energetic. You're always actively listening to people, and you can tell that you're actively listening to people, and you really do take your conversations with each individual seriously. And I know that you know a lot of people, and if anyone knows a lot of people, it's really hard to remember names sometimes, especially if you're neurodivergent. But every single conversation that I've kind of snooped in on with you, you know those people by their names and you actively listen to them. And just your tribal knowledge, I think, is highly important to this sector. And it's just been a joy to know you and learn from you and just watch your journey as you go from manufacturing into a well-known author. So thank you for all of that, because it's been inspiring for me. And you are someone that I aspire to be like. I love your leadership style, and I love your listening style, and I also love your storytelling style. So thank you for all of those things.
Oh, Megan, thank you so much. That intro made all of it worthwhile. All of it. Thank you so much. You're so kind.
You're welcome. Well, let's get started. So you began your career at 17, and that's awesome, because at 17, I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I feel like I'm still trying to figure that out. But during those early experiences, what did they teach you about manufacturing that really stayed with you as your responsibilities grew into the leadership roles that you had over your career?
Well, Megan, first of all, I would not say that at 17, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I started in manufacturing. It was really a very practical decision. I needed to put myself through college, and there was a school, GMI, Engineering and Management Institute, which is now Kettering University, that allowed you to work 6 months a year and go to school 6 months a year. So I was able to get through that education and pay for it with a small amount of debt. So I was very fortunate to have that opportunity, but I did not dream of, growing up in running the factories for Rolls-Royce Defense globally. Like that was not on my radar screen. Nobody in my family had worked in manufacturing. But when you start something that young, I think it just becomes a part of you. And there were parts of it that I loved and parts that I did not love so much. But those early days really taught me that the people closest to the work know where the problems are. It was amazing to me how we would sit in so many meetings and conference rooms and speculate about the problems we were experiencing and how they became so clear if we just took 5 minutes to walk into the factory, talk to people and observe. So that was something I really came to embrace very early. It helped me form relationships with people who were doing the work and the leadership team. And that's something I never actually gave up through all the decades. So I think that was a big deal. I saw how respect was earned, and it didn't necessarily relate to a title. And it really was earned through people listening actively, by learning what was going in and around people, and through following through. So sometimes people had to do things because people with big titles gave them direct orders, but it didn't really mean they were trusted or respected. And that was something very valuable to learn so early in my career.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree with you. I've been a part of a lot of conversations where, some of the best leaders that I know within this sector, they're great leaders because they actually connect what's going on with the shop floor to what's being talked about in those leadership conference rooms. And, even with middle management, they're like, if I want to know what problems are happening on the shop floor, I go to the shop floor workers and I ask them, hey, what problems are you trying to solve? What are your biggest annoyances? And they have to bring that information back. So a lot of your book talks about that cohesiveness, and we're going to be talking about that a lot. But as you moved from the frontline work into senior operational leadership, when did you first recognize how strongly leadership behavior shapes performance? Because sometimes, there's that avoidance of accountability with top leadership, and they want to point the fingers instead of, taking responsibility. And I related a lot of your book to another book that I read, Extreme Ownership. And I don't know if you've ever read that book, but it's by Jocko, who was a military leader. And, he references how if something goes wrong, it's on me because I'm the leader. And I need to be able to empower my team to also take accountability, but also empower them to lead within their specialties. So as you move, I'm going to ask the question again. As you moved from frontline work into senior operational leadership, when did you first recognize how strongly leadership behavior shapes performance for the whole facility?
Yeah, I think I learned that very early on. And what I found is the true test of a leader is how they react when things are not going well or as planned. So if they're kind and wonderful when the line's running at full capacity, and then something breaks down and they start screaming, shouting commands, those sorts of things, you realize that those behaviors train what the people around them are going to do the next time something bad happens, right? If you react well, I've seen teams, roll up their shirt sleeves, help that leader get through something that could be not great for their metrics or their reputation. But if they react in a way that is not productive, or that does not preserve the human dignity of the person who brought the bad news to them, people are going to hide it, or they're just going to let them discover it for themselves. So I think I really recognize that regardless of what values were written on those posters, that way they behave shapes culture. And culture is what people experience, not what they read, right? It's how does this person react when they're under pressure, when things are not going right. And that's what I witnessed very early on in teams that were very high performing. There was a high level of trust because they knew they could go to that leader, share something and get support versus share something and get berated.
One of the things too that you mentioned in your book was work norms and how leadership really sets those norms for the rest of the team. Can you go into that a little bit? Because I feel like if you come in as a new leader and they've had a different set of norms, how do you encourage the changing of norms so that everybody can work together? Because one example you provided too is how you would have these team meetings and you would ask employees to kind of talk about the things that they were experiencing, if they had any questions or suggestions. And the first couple of times you did that, there were like blank stares and silence. And then you were like, okay, fill out this form, but you don't have to sign your name. You can be anonymous. And it took a while until someone actually signed their name and you actually approached that person. And I can just imagine when I was reading through that, I could just imagine the look on that person's face, like, oh my gosh, she actually like came to talk to me. And then he didn't know how to answer your question. So how do leadership set up those norms? And then what do they need to do to really be proactive so that those norms are lived by every day by everyone on the team, not just leadership and not just shop floor workers?
I think the most important thing, Megan, is to say what you're going to do and do what you say. It's passing those trust tests every day. It's how you walk down the aisle and you see a piece of trash. Do you walk by it knowing the janitor's going to pick it up, or do you bend down and pick it up and put it away? As a very small example. But, leaders create norms by what they reward, what they tolerate, what they correct, what they repeat, and what they measure. And norms don't shift overnight, but they are literally how work gets done around here. And if they want work to be done differently, then they need to do all those things. They need to reward the right behavior. They need to correct people when they're not acting in line with values. And over time, people will come to trust them through their consistency. And that story you told is just, it's one of my favorites because I've always valued communication. And I've always felt that people who are doing the work are business partners, right? It's not like, oh, we say what to do and then the people doing the work, just need to do it and trust blindly. So yeah, I went from engineering back to operations and I'm like, I'm going to have communication meetings on all 3 shifts. And, I would give them, what's going on locally with all the activities they could join in. How's the business doing? And I was just met with blank stares month after month after month. And I was, a little dumbfounded because everything that I had read in organizational research was that people would respond. Sometimes in the factory, it doesn't necessarily look like it does in less industrial environments. And so, I put the card in there, nobody signed it. And then finally, I told them, if somebody signs it, I'm going to come see you. And the first one that was filled out said management sucks. Like that's what they put on it. Okay. And then they signed it. And I was like, this is hilarious. Right. But I was like, hey, look, I told everybody I'd come see them. So, I marched up there with my little, comment card. And I'm like, hey, Paul, I read your comment card. Could you be more specific? Like, is it senior management? Is it your team leader? Am I the problem? And he was just like, oh my gosh. And he's like, I just didn't really think anyone would come see me. And it was so funny because I didn't know it at the time, but I passed a major trust test. And then after that, I started getting lots of questions and discussions, and people, instead of ignoring me, would call me over and want to talk. So, I don't know that we've ever read that in other leadership books, but, I'm all about real talk.
Yeah. Well, and I think that created an effect too, because he probably went and told his coworkers like, oh my God, she actually came and talked to me. And that probably put a light bulb in the rest of their minds like, oh, wait, so does that mean if I actually put my name down or if I approach her, she'll be open to that communication? And I think it also shows maybe the PTSD that team felt before you came in as the new leader. It probably was a toxic situation for them prior to you coming in. And that's why they were afraid to open up their mouths and be so communicative with you, because I'm sure this goes to anyone tuning in right now. Like, we've all had that experience with toxic leadership and toxic work culture where, you're encouraged to say something, but then if you say something that might be slightly negative or open the door for an improvement talk, it gets shut down, especially if it's not someone else's idea. Like, I've been part of those toxic work cultures before, and you get PTSD, and when a new leader comes in and says, hey, I'm open to communication, you're like, yeah, okay, sure. Like,
Been there, done
so
that.
yeah, like I'm not falling for that. That's a trap. So I thought that was a really interesting example, and I laughed when I read it because I was like, I was that person that would have been like, put my name down and be vague in what my critique is, and then if you were to come and talk to me, I'd be like, oh shit, like, am I still gonna have a job after this? Like, I was just kidding. Like, but yeah, so I definitely related to that example. So was there a particular leadership experience that forced you to reconsider how you were leading people? Like, was there any time during your journey where you thought, oh, I need to switch this up a little bit because what I'm doing right now isn't really working and not bringing people together?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Every situation that you walk into as a leader, you're trying to find out what works with that group. And so while there are principles in
Mm-hmm.
leadership science that do work, there's different nuances in different cultures everywhere that you go. And so you try to reach into your tool arsenal for things that you believe are going to motivate that particular team. And one of the things that I really spent a lot of time in my career on was transforming organizational cultures and putting in lean manufacturing systems. And in one particular situation, I had been the corporate leader of lean systems globally. And then I went and ran a division. So I was under a lot of pressure to show them, that I could practice what I preach. So I felt a lot of pressure. And when I got there, I pushed my team pretty hard with, I've seen this hundreds of places. This is going to work. And we started to set things up and get a little traction. And one day I was working late and the second shift leader stayed after. And he was kind of slumped over at his desk. So I went and sat down with him and I asked him, is everything okay? And he sort of perked up. Yeah, everything's great. And I'm like, you can be honest with me. What's going on? And he was leading a change initiative for me. And he related so well to the people on his team, but he didn't have Excel skills. He didn't know how to use Excel. And he was so worried that he was going to get fired because he couldn't provide the data that we needed to make the next improvement. And at that moment, I had to step back and really realize that people may have been feeling more pressure than they needed to for us to be
Mm.
successful. And so I told them, I said, look, nobody on my team who tries is ever going to lose their job, because something didn't go fast enough or they hadn't had the opportunity to be trained in a skill. And I said, I got a whole room of engineers out there who can do gymnastics around Excel, but none of them can lead the team the way you can. So I got them paired up with it. And so, I realized I had to change my approach and make sure that I wasn't amplifying my personal pressure, that I needed to take that into account and buffer what I was experiencing from upper leadership so that my team could operate in a culture where they felt safe. I mean, I never threatened to fire anyone. I don't know where that came from.
Mhm.
If you don't, I will. But sometimes we do have to let people go, but it's never
Yeah.
going to be anyone, that's contributing and trying to the best of their abilities, unless there's just some major catastrophic thing in the market, So yeah, so I was always adjusting my leadership style to be responsive to the organization that I was leading. The principles were always the same, but
Mhm.
sometimes some of them needed a little pushing and sometimes they needed me to back off a little bit. So you just have to be in tune with that.
I think that's important too for anyone who's listening and that might be in a leadership position. You need to keep that channel of communication open because we're hearing a lot from shop floor workers now, even with automation and AI that's going around. By the way, artificial intelligence used to be known as business intelligence, so it's been around forever. I'm just getting so tired of the AI buzzword, but there's still a lot of like hesitation for people to, you know, be on board with some of these technologies coming in because they feel like, oh, if I'm not up to par with that technology, I'm going to lose my job and it's going to take my position. So I think what you're sharing in this book is so important now because of all of the advanced technologies coming in and with the labor shortage and the labor challenges that we're experiencing. There's a lot of pressure on employees now like, oh, if I'm not up to par with the technology, if I can't, you know, learn how to use the cobot or learn what the AI is for, I'm not going to have a position anymore. So I think your leadership model is important so that we can sort of neutralize some of that fear that might be coming from the shop floor workers who are doing the work and operating the machines. Um, I do want to take a dive into your leadership model because that's what your title focuses on. The acronym is really thoughtful. And I think it stands out because it mentions things like relationships and optimism and excellence and, you know, maintaining psychological safety and integrity. So, what led you to develop the more leadership model? I know you went and got your PhD, and one of the fascinating things that I thought about you was how you're into psychology. And not a lot of people will connect psychology to manufacturing, but it does connect. Like it does have a relationship. So, what led you to develop the more leadership model?
Yeah, well, it 100% connects because I will always say that manufacturing is a people business, right?
Hmm.
Regardless of the product or service that or the technologies that you use. So I had always wanted to study psychology. As a matter of
Hmm.
fact, excuse me, when I was 17 and started working in the car plant, I wanted to go study psychology. And my dad was like, yeah, no, you need a PhD. You're going to come out with $100,000 in debt. It'll take you forever to pay that back. Yeah, no. So it was sort of a bucket list item that I wanted to do. And when I was growing up, the organizational psychologists had pivoted away from manufacturing. And so I didn't ever have, that org scientist person or that that you could go to and learn from. So it was by trial and error. And I was working with a coach, and she said, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I was like, "Well, am I not doing it? I'm running global operations for a large and iconic company." And she said, "Well, is that like, do you just want to do that the whole rest of your career? Do you want to run a bigger organization? Do you want to be a CEO?" And I was like, "Oh my goodness, I don't know." I hadn't really thought about it. I was spending all my energy on what I wanted to do day to day. So, long story short, I took her challenge seriously. I went to all the books that were giving me energy, and they all related back to this master's in applied positive psychology at Penn. So I left my large title and job and applied to school and went back to school to study psychology. And what that program did for me is it gave me the framework in the research that really bolstered my decades of leading in and around manufacturing. Because sometimes I worked with hundreds of plants globally, not in direct leadership, but helping them transform their businesses through lean manufacturing. So it gave me the research behind it to bolster it. But what I found was a lot of the research focused on more professional organizations. And I knew the principles all applied, but I was like, someone needs to translate this for this environment, right? All these amazing researchers are talking about things that happen on carpet, basically. Well, they happen on concrete too, but someone just needs to translate it, right? So good communication skills might mean showing up and not taking offense when someone writes "management sucks" on a comment card. So I wanted to develop a model that was easy for people to remember based on these principles. So I came up with the acronym of MORE, which is about leading operations with meaning, optimism, and relationships for excellence. Excellence is the outcome of those pillars. It's easy to remember, and it really is a great superseding structure for all of the concepts that help organizations and the people in them thrive.
And one of the main points too that you really try to connect with throughout the book is like this sense of purpose, right? Meaningful work. So how does meaningful work change the way employees understand their contribution to an operation? And this question is important for me because my dad worked in manufacturing his entire life, but he was always in a senior leadership position. I've worked in a couple distribution centers where I knew what it felt like to do something wrong because that was always pointed out. But when I did something right, it was never pointed out. So it just felt like, okay, I'm just showing up for the pay. And I have siblings too who are in manufacturing environments right now to this day where they're just showing up for the paycheck. They don't really care about the work. They're not connected to the purpose. And when they talk about the leadership in that facility, I can understand why. Like the leadership person sounds like a horrible human being. Like everybody that's working under them is basically just they're not a human. They're just a worker, So how does meaningful work change the way employees understand their contribution to an operation and get them really excited about being part of that bigger picture?
Yeah, well, first of all, people need to be treated with dignity and respect. And, I would tend to say that if that's not the basics of what they're experiencing, how they serve customers probably doesn't matter too much because they're just trying to survive a day, right? Without emotional abuse, which is, quite a strong word, but we've all experienced it. So that's the baseline. And on top of that, though, people want to experience meaning in their lives, and they spend a lot of time, a lot of hours in those meaning in work, right? So it's helpful if the work is meaningful. I think that it doesn't mean that every task that we're going to do is glamorous, but it does mean that we're recognized for our contribution. And for some people, showing up for the paycheck is enough because it's allowing their families to realize their dreams, right? Like sacrifice for that. But the baseline again is decent work and being treated with dignity and respect. Beyond that, it's about connectivity and how what you are doing serves either someone down the line within the facility, the community, makes the world a better place. And that means a lot to people because, through the years in industrial engineering, of which I am one, we've segmented work for the sake of productivity. Good reason. But that means we're somewhat disconnected from where our efforts end up at times. And so like in steel toes and stilettos, right? Running the rubber plants. It wasn't particularly meaningful to people to know that yesterday I formed 10,000 seals and today I formed 10,100. But when I started bringing in salespeople to tell them where their seals were used, and one of them told us that our seal was used in the military in their hydration units and had gone on a very well-known mission. They were like, oh, that's pretty cool. We can't assume that people are going to connect those dots. We need to be intentional about it. And sometimes you can create meaning, not by the job, but by, how your company shows up in the community. You can be involved in food drives or things that are meaningful to people. So there's lots of different things that add meaning. But what we find is when we connect with our workforce in the different ways that people find meaning, they give more of their discretionary effort versus just coming in, punching a clock and waiting for a check. And that
I think that
results.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, especially now, because it's been said that these younger generations are really mindful about what their purpose is in life. And there are community things and civil things going on that matter to them. And if you kind of just shrug it off and not really pay attention to that, they're going to keep that note in their back pocket and not apply for whatever opportunities you have because they don't think their personal values and beliefs matter to you. I met at a automation conference. I met a young woman because I'm friends with one of the marketing people at this robotics company. They're a systems integrator, and they introduced me and they're like, "Oh, these are our new interns. They're going to be working with me in the department. I'm really excited to have them." And I asked both of them. I said, "Okay, well, what got you to their table? Like, why did you approach their table? Why did you pick them as the company you wanted to do an intern for?" And they were like, because during career day, they were the only table that had a female representative. And they're like, that mattered to us because we're women and we wanted to make sure that, we could connect with other women in this sector. So I was like, that's so important for people. Yeah, they were the only table that had a female representative. So they went there, they talked to my friend because my friend was the one that was the representative, and they just loved everything about her and they felt comfortable. They were like, oh, women in this sector matters to this company because they brought a female representative. So that's the company they picked. So small things like that do matter. And I just wish more companies would be aware of that situation. You spend a lot of time talking about optimism in your book, and that can sound soft, I guess, when leaders are managing missed targets and quality concerns or any major changes. How do you define optimism in an operational setting? Because I really enjoyed that chapter in your book. So I just wanted to focus on that for a little bit for this conversation.
Yeah. So I think optimism gets a really bad rap, like everybody runs around thinking everything is rosy and perfect. And I learned more about optimism when I went back to school. So the father of positive psychology, Marty Seligman, was one of my professors, and he's really big on optimism and has been studying it for years. And so optimism is not having a sunny disposition all the time, although there's nothing wrong with that. It's really about the stories you tell yourself when things go wrong. And let's face it, every single day in manufacturing, there are opportunities for things to go wrong. But if you look at these things as permanent, as pervasive and personal, you're a pessimist and you're giving off pessimistic energy that, is here we go again and we'll never get this fixed. But if you're an optimist, you can really bolster your team by saying, okay, here's the reality. Let's name the reality. We did not get this part in that we need to build our engine. So, what are our options? What's the next step? How can we learn from this to prevent it from happening again? And it's optimism that I believe underpins continuous improvement.
I agree.
If you're a leader that believes in your team and believes that something better is possible, there's a much better chance of that team getting better results than if you were naturally pessimistic and you project that with your team.
Yeah, I think pessimism really sucks the life out of people, and it just gets so annoying, and it's like, this isn't helping anybody on the team. So can we like liven it up? And I love, like, I've had wonderful leaders who have been optimistic, and it just is so refreshing because they're like, okay, yeah, shit does hit the fan, but we're all alive still, so let's figure out how to keep moving forward. And it's just a lot more fun trying to figure out those solutions to those problems that have happened when you have a more optimistic leader.
Yeah, you want to project that people's efforts matter and can make a difference.
Yeah, and I mean, it just makes things prolong longer if you're pessimistic about it. Like it doesn't help bring things back up to speed or anything. And I want to get into that too, about the role, what role do relationships play in accountability and problem solving and continuous improvement? Because again, it's a chain reaction, right? Whether you decide to be positive or negative. So in terms of relationships, what role do they play in accountability, problem solving, and continuous improvement?
Well, relationships are also foundational, right? And good relationships are based on trust. And so you need trust to be able to listen without judgment, to really separate the person, the messenger, from the message sometimes. And you need to build up these banks of positive energy, which one way to build that is through optimism, so that when things are hard and you have to have difficult conversations, the person at the other end trusts that you care about them, you care about the organization, you care about the standards in the organization, and you care enough about them to help them achieve those standards. So, none of those concepts is mutually exclusive. They all build on one another. And, they're likely to listen to what you have to say versus discounting it, even when things are difficult. I had a supervisor once. I was a manufacturing superintendent, and there was a lady who was a supervisor working for me. And she had an employee who it was widely known was struggling with alcohol. And she just loved him and wanted to look the other way. But by not holding him accountable, he was going down a very bad spiral. And so, being clear is kind, and holding people accountable is kind if you are helping them not self-destruct and providing the support they need. So she eventually sat down with him and said, look, you're not coming to work. You're coming in late. you're having to leave early. Your friends are having trouble depending on you. We all want to, cover for you and help you. But you know what? You're going to lose your job if this continues. And as much as I adore you when you're here, you're, helpful and that sort of thing. And here's some EAP assistance, and we're going to give you all the time and support you need to turn this around. And so he did. He sought help, and eventually he thanked her for saving his job, but he also thanked her for saving his life.
Yeah.
So again, a dramatic demonstration of it, but that's how all those things come together. He trusted her enough to listen to her difficult message and know that she would be with him through a very difficult journey. And so what's the result? He gets better. He becomes one of our best employees ever. People around him see that the company cares about not just the results, but the people who are getting the results. And, that's priceless. It really is.
I like how she approached it too, because he was able to maintain his dignity as a human being. He wasn't like, she didn't put it in a situation where he would become embarrassed or maybe ashamed of his, personal issues. So I really like the way that she approached it. And I think that's one of the things that happens a lot within this sector, especially now with all the advanced technologies. We forget that human side. Like, we're all human. We're not perfect. We have our flaws, we have our faults, and we make mistakes. And she was able to maintain his dignity during that conversation, which I think was a huge factor in him turning it around and being a better employee for it. So again, that's why I love your book, because it's just like you see the people, you actually see them, you're listening to them, you're hearing them, and you're providing a roadmap for leaders to become better leaders so that they can be more successful. Have you seen any leaders, because I know this is a brand new book, and we just introduced your model. Have you seen any leaders struggle when trying to apply this model? And if so, where are they struggling? Or are we still in the infancy stages of this?
We're still in the infancy stages, but I think I've been coaching this and doing a group coaching with this material for years, because it was 5 years, between when I put the model together and got around to publishing the book. And, although I did update all the research, so, it doesn't have a 5-year gap in it. I think where people struggle is they make things more difficult than they need to be. At the end of every chapter, I have do a little more today for the first line supervisor, the middle manager, and the executive. And none of those things require a calculus degree, right? But I don't think people appreciate how spending time on designing that culture and doing those things has an amazing impact on the people around them and the organization in which they operate. A while back, I was doing this coaching for a team and who made wire. And their HR person said, Kathy, can you make a list of conversation starters that our supervisors can use when a new employee starts? And I said, well, what do you mean? There's like a million things they could talk about. And she said, well, sometimes the frontline leaders struggle with that. And then it hit me that one of the things that I love about manufacturing is good companies allow people to move into leadership from manual labor if they want to. And so a lot of times the people who are the best mechanic, the best electrical engineer, the best machine operator get promoted into leadership, but they don't have the skills or the support to know leadership skills, which are much different than, being able to make a machine hum. So that's where I think it's difficult. And that's where I love this book. It's like, pick up the book. It's not just filled with stories, but science and very practical applications that can help you get through your day if you didn't get to go, for a master's in applied positive psychology. So
Yeah.
I think there's so much potential for it to just be such a practical roadmap for the organizations that do struggle. And honestly, I work for 4 very large companies. There's lots of subcultures in companies, lots of different leaders. And even,
Mhm.
within some of the largest icons, there are pockets where people really struggle with these concepts. But you can tell the ones who really get it because their teams are happy and they're exceeding expectations for the most part.
Yeah. Um, so you're not the only individual that I know who's really passionate about company culture. Like, for those of you tuning in, my good friend Jim Mayer, who's the founder of the Manufacturing Connector, he's also really big on company culture. And I just remember being at a show, an older gentleman like grabbed him by the arm after a presentation and was like, completely insulted by the fact that he was trying to promote positive culture for better innovation and productivity. And like, he had the research and he named all the research, but this old school gentleman was just like, no, that doesn't matter. It doesn't, people just need to work and show up and do their job. So one of the things that you describe culture as an operating system rather than a slogan. So can you go into what it means to treat culture as an operating system? Like, what does that
Yeah.
mean?
What it means is that you have to have that consistent behavior in how work gets done. Like we talked about, what do you reward? What do you tolerate? What do you correct? What do you repeat? What do you measure? All of those things are so important. And I think it's really sad when people assume that these behaviors sound soft. They
Mm-hmm.
actually lead to hard metrics. And I've got 3+ decades of proof and case studies that show that.
Mm-hmm. You do. I love the fact that you cited all of your research too at the end of the book. As a
Mhm.
technical writer, I really appreciate that because I don't see a lot of people doing that. Um, where do you see then where trust, psychological safety, and accountability intersect in a manufacturing environment? Where is that happening?
Again, it's at that level of trust, human being to
Mm-hmm.
human being, no matter what level in the company you are. And,
Mm-hmm.
I just go back to that Joanne example, right? There was trust. He trusted her to have his best interest at heart. She trusted him to be able to have a difficult conversation, even not knowing what the outcome was going to be. In that case, it was an amazing outcome. Could have had the same conversation with someone else and it might not have been. But, there was enough psychological safety for him to reach for help and trust her, and know that being accountable for his actions were ultimately going to lead to his success versus his demise in that organization.
So we talked about before the experience where you had people fill out forms anonymously and
Mhm.
then, oh, if you sign your name, I'll come talk to you. Are there any other ways that you can where leaders can encourage employees to raise concerns without, lowering standards or avoiding difficult conversations? Because I feel like that is a hard thing for individuals at a company to do, especially um, if those concerns have either been ignored or there was like some negative sort of retaliation against them. Because that's happened with me before and other employees that I've worked at, where if they raised a concern, there was some retaliation from other leadership, or if it was a concern about another employee, there was retaliation from that other employee. So, like, what ways can leaders encourage employees to raise those concerns um, if they don't feel comfortable doing so?
Yeah. So, Megan, just so you know, I've also experienced those things firsthand. I don't want anybody listening to this to think that my life in manufacturing was all rainbows and unicorns. I worked in
Mhm.
wonderful cultures, and I worked in cultures that like you couldn't pay me enough to join again.
Mhm.
So, I've got some battle scars, even though I smile a lot. I do have some battle scars. And, there's always HR or a third party that you can go to, or a leader in a different organization if you don't feel safe. But as a leader, quite honestly, you have the power to change that culture. And so, what I learned, even in those toxic environments, was that I was not going to amplify the toxicity. I
Mhm.
was going to be there for my people and help my people. And sometimes there were times that I would advise them, as long as there wasn't, harassment, something illegal, something, that has to be reported, I would ask them to pick and choose their battles because of things that I saw around me. And I think that, the main thing as a leader is you owe your people dignity, respect, and truth, and they will come to trust you. And
Mhm.
I think that's really the most important thing, is sometimes that you have to be a buffer and not an amplifier and help people work through things. I've I've had people come to me and they don't trust a coworker for a certain reason. And so I'll ask a lot of questions and coach them through that and offer some possible reframes,
Mhm.
like, oh, that guy doesn't do anything, or, those sorts of things. But I've also had to remove people who are bringing the team down as well. A little bit of, that concept of tough love was sort of how I described
Mhm.
my leadership style.
Yeah. So in terms of technology adoption, it's often discussed through capabilities, integration, return on investment, and implementation schedules. Your perspective brings the conversation back to purpose, autonomy, mastery, connection, and the leadership responsibilities surrounding the change. And one of the things that you do, you describe technology adoption through the hands, head, and heart of change. What does each part of that represent?
Yeah. So, hands is the very practical matter that we always worry about in operations. Like, are we training people? Are they capable of doing this? You know, is this going to be something that they can work with? So that's just that very practical piece of it. And again, I want people to understand that you can't just send somebody to like one training and then not support them through a whole learning process, right? Like, oh yeah, they took the
Mhm.
2-hour course, they should be a master of Claude now. That's not really how humans learn and sustain
Right.
learning. So that's important. But the head part is, do they understand why we're making the change? And can we get them to a point where, yeah, the plan's credible?
Mhm.
People are more than their hands. They all have ideas. They know where the system's going to fail because we've just replicated something that doesn't work manually into something that's automatic. So
Mhm.
bringing those people on board and understanding what their concerns are. And then sometimes resistance is not rebellion, it's just vulnerability. What does this new technology mean for me? Right. My identity was being like the master of skill XYZ, and you're giving that now to a robot. So, how am I going to still have dignity when I come in here during the day? And I want to contribute. I want to be secure. I want to know that, I'm not helping eliminate my own job. Let's
Right.
have conversations around that. Now, am I naive enough to think that people don't lay people off when they do that? No, I know that happens. I know it happens. I would say when you look at manufacturing overall, there's plenty of jobs in manufacturing. We can't even fill, even with all the technology that we're doing. So, generically, there's enough for all of us with the technologies, but individually, that might not be meaningful. So, be honest about conversations, give people the chance to master new skills, to belong in the new environment, to be able to contribute. And if it's really not going to work, let's handle that with dignity, trust, and respect as well. And that's all about the heart. And people will see how you treat those struggling among them.
The example that I always think about is the dock worker strikes when they went on strikes, and I was so irritated with a lot of the comments on LinkedIn because they were saying, oh, don't they know that advanced technology is just going to help them be more successful and do a better job? And I'm like, no, they don't know, because no one is explaining that to them. Like, you have to understand that some of these individuals have been at their job for 30, 40 plus years. And some of them may not want to learn a new technology because they have retirement on the top of their mind.
That's
so
right.
When you're coming in and just saying, we're doing this and that's it, stop, like they're going to be like, well, what does that mean for me? So where should leaders draw the line between protecting human contribution and then holding on to work that no longer serves the operation?
Well, it's a transition, right? Technology can be so good for us. It can reduce muscle strain. It can help us analyze things quicker so we can spend more time on constructive problem solving. It can do so many good things for us and make things so much faster. But we want to protect human judgment still, and really, once we look at the data and, that we get so much more quickly versus, we have to wait, 10 years to see when this thing's going to fail, right? And what to do about it. I think that's what's important. And I think protecting your people is about making sure they have an opportunity to contribute as things are being implemented. What would make this better for you? What about this could you still contribute to feel like you have purpose and meaning? Or, is there something else you'd like to do around here? I mean, you have 30 years of experience. What if you led the safety committee? Or, there's just so many ways. I think what we want to do is embrace the technology and what it can bring to our operations, but still maintain that humanity is always going to be part of manufacturing, no matter how technical you are, and recognizing, the importance of people having a purpose, of people knowing that what they can contribute in the future will matter as much as what they contributed in the past.
So, one of the things that I want to, because we only have a few minutes left, and I feel like I could talk to you for hours about this, and I wish we had more time. But one of the things that I do want to address, because I'm a huge advocate for women in this space, and women in manufacturing, which we're both a part of, they released a statistic a couple of years ago where it said we're up about 30% in representation. That's kind of vague because it doesn't really break down where that 30% is, like what positions or fields women are in. Most of it could be in sales and marketing. I think CNC machining was on there, or things that we're actually using our hands to build things. Engineering, I think it's only around 15 to 16% globally, which is very tiny percentage. And one of the things that you said is women in manufacturing need more than inspiration. And I feel like that is true. And, a lot of people said, well, with all these advancements in technology, women can really step up. And my whole argument is, well, yeah, if they knew that these opportunities were available, even men don't know some of these opportunities are available. I talked to a young man in high school, and he took a CNC machine class because he thought it was 3D printing. He didn't know what CNC machining was. He was like, I thought I was going to be printing stuff out of plastic, not making things out of metal. He's like, it's cool, but this is not what I was expecting. So, um, what are companies still failing to provide when not just attracting younger generations, but women into these technical spaces and these STEM opportunity career pathways? What are they still failing to provide?
Well, I think that, the school systems, starting in secondary education, need to let people know that these opportunities exist. And
Mm-hmm.
that I think that we are starting to see that. When my kids went to back to school, it was like military or 4-year college. That's all they
Mm-hmm.
talked to people about, as they were transitioning into the real world. So our communities and our schools need to do a better job educating people that, like, look, this is a great opportunity for you. And so that's the case. But it's like that example you gave about, why did you go here? Well, I saw a woman at the booth. It was the only one, right? So people need to see that people that look like them can contribute and succeed. So again, we need to be visible with it, but what women need is access, right? Encouragement and access. They need the ability to develop credibility within their space. When they do show up, they need sponsorship. They need people to look out for them and represent them accurately when they're not in the room, and just fair standards, right? And
Mm-hmm.
again, I didn't have this, but I've talked to many women who have. I was almost always the only woman in the room in all the years. I never worked for a female boss. For me, because of how my dad brought me up, I was like, okay, I don't care. I'll be the first. But so many that I talk to now are like, I'm not going there because nobody at the top looks like me. And we
Mm-hmm.
still see that. So, yes, progress is being made, but I would say not quickly enough. And again, it's not about a law or how many you have. It's about the fact that when you have diverse teams, you get better results because you have more perspectives. And that's what this is all about.
Right. You mentioned the word sponsorship, and I don't think people understand that mentorship and sponsorship are different concepts. So how would you define sponsorship? Because I think that's important, and I think that's what women need the most over mentorship. Yes, mentorship is important, but I think women, especially women who want to be on that career path to a leadership position, need more sponsorship opportunities. So how would you define that?
Yeah, it's having allies. It's people who speak about your capabilities when you're not in the room.
Mm-hmm. And I think that can be more effective when it comes from male leaders, and you can disagree with this if you want, but I think it's more effective if it comes from a male leader in the same sector, because I met someone at a WIM event, and they had a keynote speaker, and her sponsor was there, and it was a higher up CEO of some major tech company, but he was
Mhm.
well known, and he any room that he went into, he talked about her, and he connected her, and he would refer her and bring her opportunities. So it's basically putting your credibility on the line for this specific person,
Yes.
which means a lot in the manufacturing world, especially if you're a high respected individual. So I feel like more companies need to provide that sponsorship for women, especially if they want them to move up in
Yeah.
leadership
And
roles.
it has to be earned. You don't get
Yeah.
it just because you're female.
Oh,
It's because, it's
for
because no,
sure.
you're super capable and you can move this company.
For sure. But that's I feel like that's why male allies too are especially important, because I've had a lot of guys who are like, you're being ridiculous, Megan. Like, stop doubting yourself and just jump off the cliff. You're gonna be fine. Like you're gonna and I needed that extra oomph from
Yeah.
them specifically, because there aren't a lot of women that I knew at the time telling me to do that. It was all the guys that were like, stop being ridiculous and just
Well, they were they were the only ones around, right? And the
Right.
few women that weren't necessarily sponsoring younger females, which is a whole different episode.
Yeah, for sure. We'll
But
have to
we
come
don't want to
back to that.
we don't want to be those women. We want
Right.
to sponsor all talent, right?
Right.
That's
Mhm.
going to take the operation to the next level. And
Right.
sometimes that's going to be males and sometimes it's going to be females, but you want a balanced approach to that.
Right. Well, Kathy, an hour is not enough. We did go over a little bit, but I'm definitely okay with that. Is there anything that you would like to conclude on? I could again talk to you for hours. I didn't get through all of my questions that I had for you, but I think we got to the gist of things, especially with your book. But is there anything that you want to conclude on? If you have a big ask for our audience, what would that be? If you have a shameless plug you want to put in there, what would that be?
Well, my final thought would be, that you can't demand excellence. Like that's old school, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can design the conditions that create excellence. And my shameless plug is if you or your organization wants to know more about my work, you can reach out to me, see my books, my More Mentor, that's an AI agent. All of the things to reach Kathy are at more4leaders.com. That's the number 4, more4leaders.com. There's free guidance for frontline supervisors on how to do a little bit more, access to the mentor, the books, and a link to get in touch with me personally. So that's my shameless plug, Megan.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Kathy. For anyone listening or watching, I hope this conversation encouraged you to examine the employee experience behind your performance metrics, especially all of your operations. Look closely at, what gets rewarded, what gets tolerated, because that's a huge thing too that signals to other employees whether or not they can trust you or share information with you. And it also carries a massive amount of weight in whether technology is helping people contribute more or effectively, or simply asking them to absorb another poorly explained change. So make sure you have that channel of communication open. Our next episode I'm really excited for is Rosario Evenet. She's actually in the textile space. So she's the founder of a sewing incubator in the US. And we're going to have a conversation about soft goods development, domestic production, and workforce capability, and the infrastructure required to turn an idea into something that can actually be manufactured. So I'm really excited to have her on, not next week, but next month. She'll be on at the end of August. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you again to Omega Cool. They sponsored this episode. Again, if you're at IMTS, please reach out to me. I will be there with a red microphone for MTD CNC, but I'm also going to be walking around with Turtle Tech, who is the team that I sponsor. So if you're looking for something to do to connect younger generations to manufacturing, please sponsor younger kids and the robotics teams that they are putting together, because they need those donations. They need that knowledge. They need the mentorship. And they just need your knowledge. So be sure to do that. Again, Kathy, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Megan.
Bye, everyone. Have a great weekend. This episode of Mavens of Manufacturing has been sponsored by Z Ink Solutions. Z Ink Solutions. This isn't your grandmother's copywriting service. We provide copywriting and copy editing services that provide impactful text and memorable storytelling for a variety of brands and industries. Contact us today at zinksolutions.com. That's z-inksolutions.com.